So, a warm welcome to eHealth Learning. It's 7 o'clock on Wednesday, the 13th of February. And we have a dream team of trio from Ireland, America or Canada? Are you in?
Canada.
Canada, yeah. And Joanne in Brighton. John Sharkey, Wilbour, Kelsick, and Joanne Iverson. We had you, the three of you here on eHealth, and people were excited to listen to you for 2 hours. We're not going to go on that long tonight. We're going to speak for about an hour tonight. And it's a joy to have you back talking about how Biotensegrity unlocks the Fascia code, which is an intriguing title. So very warm welcome back. And we've got quite a few attendees already, and we're live on Facebook. So take it away, one of you.
It's great. I was just going to say, Wilbour, it's great to see you. It's great to see Joanne. Myself and Joanne were just teaching together in County Cork in Ireland. And it's great to be here with eHealth. We love teaching for eHealth. And I suppose I'm going to kick the ball off by saying that people will see that the word code was used, because that's integral to what we're going to be talking about. Code in terms of a set of instructions, programming instructions. And I often say that the program instructions for fascia, from a biotensegral viewpoint, is what we refer to as full body kinetic chain motion. And we were just doing that, in fact, in County Cork in Ireland at the weekend, and people got a real sense, a real tactile sense, kinetic sense of what it meant, literally what it meant. And so we're going to come back to this probably again in a couple of moments' time, but in biotensegrity, we talk about the forces of tension and compression. And we cannot talk about biotensegrity without talking about fascia. We cannot talk about fascia without talking about biotensegrity. They're intimately interlaced and interconnected. But fascia adapts and changes its architecture and its material preferences by laying down very precise materials which then meet location specific mechanical demands. And therefore people may have heard the expression that fascia thickens along lines of tension. So from that perspective, the motion in your life, or the lack of motion in your life, will ultimately dictate your overall shape and can dictate the expression of the connective tissues in the human body. And so it's really therefore about making informed choices in terms of your choice of physical activities that are hugely important. And that's part, that for me, that's the essential part of unlocking the code. So the code ultimately is about tension and compression. Joanne, do you want to add to that?
Oh yeah, I could wax lyrical for hours.
Of course.
And as a code, it's also very interesting, John. I think we talked about this a bit at the weekend, that when you think about a computer, we think about it as having hardware and software. We're not talking so much about the body as a machine. We have to be very careful about this. You know, my thing about bioemotional integrity rather than biomechanical, the body doesn't move mechanically. And as you've said, that code is related so deeply to force transmission, the type of transmission and the type of force. And that is deeply embedded in the biotensegral code, expressed as a fascial matrix uniquely to each of us by our movement processes. So if, for example, we were in Wilbour's Olympic team, we would have movement protocols that would give rise to an architecture that reflected that biotensegral relationship through every aspect of the body as networks. And if you were in my yoga class, you would have something different. And if John was training you in medical exercise or with sandbells or ropes or whatever, you would have then different expressions. So what we're going to be looking at, and I hope we each get to do in Canada when we do the Vancouver event, is actually experiencing how these forces transmit through this software And one of the keystones, I think, of why, one of the questions I get a lot is, how come you know this and my doctor doesn't know what you're talking about, or my movement teacher doesn't know what you're talking about? Why is it new? Why, we've talked about movement for hundreds of years. And one of the things I think is that we are now ready to understand networks. We live in an age of networks. We live in an age where we expect to touch 5 buttons on a phone and we're talking to somebody on the other side of the planet. I mean, look at this Zoom event. My nearly 90-year-old father walks in when I'm on FaceTime with one of you guys and says, he's where? He's in Dublin? Oh my God, that's amazing. Because my dad remembers when the first computers were in industry and they took up rooms the size of my living room with fans that were even bigger than the room to keep them cool. And now this little beast has got more in it than my father was capable of managing over miles, And so this is where I think our understanding of networks allows us in to understand the fascia as a network, a matrix throughout the body. But without understanding its volumetric nature and its organization and its structure, we see that, we know that, but we don't have the code to make sense of that in ourselves and our clients. So I think that's also what we mean by the code, isn't it? It's the software programming that we feed this with. And that doesn't just mean the big event you have when you go and do Pilates class or a yoga class or go to the gym or train on the track. We're talking about the code of how much time you spend sitting in your car, in your train to work, on airplanes and so on, that you pay a structural price, good, bad or indifferent, for that as a force transmission expression of this architecture. So fascia doesn't exist, doesn't continue, doesn't connect, doesn't mean anything, cut out in a square and pulled between 2 pieces of clamps and histologically examined in terms of how we move it, because it's been taken out of its environment and it's no longer playing its essential role in this force transmission communication of this software system, this network. So I think that, does that say what I'm saying? What's that?
Oh, I think that's wonderful, Joanne. And by the way, Wilbour here. Wilbour, I'm not. I just realized what was happening here. Now I'm Maxfit movement. Yes, my mom wouldn't be very pleased about my name. I'm Wilbour.
Wilbour.
Yes. Yeah. That's how technology challenged I am. But I think that's so beautifully said what you and John just outlined. Before I knew about fascia, and before I knew about force transmission, I knew about something called connective tissue. And I also knew another word called adaptation. And I also knew that connective tissue, which I said once, has an infinite capacity for adaptation. And I think without repeating what you said, it's what we call adaptation through the process of homeostasis. And that's what fascia architecture is able to do, is that the tissue will adapt to the situation, to the environment that it's exposed to. And that's what adaptation is. And it takes a certain amount of time for that adaptation to take effect. So sitting for long periods of time or training a certain way for long periods of time will adapt your structure, your architecture to withstand those forces and to allow adequate and efficient transmission to occur. So that's all I would like to add to this, is adaptation.
And that's brilliant. And I'm not surprised that Dr. Kelsick comes in with the word adaptation. It makes absolute sense, in terms of the sequence of this conversation, because really what that then brings us, I saw a quick little question coming up there from Christine. It said something about functional, Julian, you might expand on what the actual question is, but
sure.
What is the question, by the way, from Christine?
From Christine is, can you talk a little more about functional strengthening for our current culture?
Right.
What is the good movement practice for the sedentary desk jockey?
Yeah, so you see, so this is where Wilbour brought it into then to functionality. So in in exercise science or in sports science, we have a term called specificity. And in bodywork therapy, we have an anagram which is SAID, S-A-I-D. And SAID is specific adaptations to imposed demands. I wrote down the word adaptation just as Wilbour was saying it. So specific adaptations to imposed demands. And so individuals have to understand that specific type of movements lead to specific mechanobiological changes within whatever it is that people are calling fascia today. And, you know, fascia, as many people know, for me, and includes the bones. And I'm sure that I don't want to speak on behalf of Joanne and Wilbour. I'll let them agree or disagree. I think I know how they think.
Where I stand.
Yeah. So the idea, though, is that we have to think about the type of adaptation that we want to achieve and recognize that that adaptation is specific to the imposed demand. And so therefore, if people do not understand the code, if they do not understand the fascial code, then they're not able to lock in the correct sequence in order to be able to get either a therapeutic outcome or a specific training effect. And I think what's happened now, and Joanne is absolutely correct, that it's really, if you cut out a piece of connective tissue, whatever that piece of connective tissue is, and whatever you do with it, whether it's that you put it between two clamps and pull it, or even what we did within the fascial net plastination project in dissecting out the fascia, what you can do in that regard is at least demonstrate a reverse vision of what anatomy has shown us up to this point, which is that anatomy has shown us the red protein that we call muscle fibers, these specialized cells that have the ability to contract much better than other cells in the human body. And we have shown those cells within their, whatever you wish to call them, compartments or whatever, so that they have a specific shape like a biceps brachii or sternocleidomastoid. However, what did happen was the fasciae were removed. And so I suppose what we've done is we've taken these parts out of the body and we've shown them in reverse. We show the compartments with the muscle fibers removed. And of course, that is no more an accurate vision of anatomy than the original one, but at least it shows us, it demonstrates to us what was missing. And now what we really need to do is we need to bring all of those disparate parts together, and we need to talk about the continuity and the connectiveness and begin to realize that not all tissues recover or heal at the same rate. And so when somebody went out and just trained and then decided to maybe give themselves 24 hours to recover and come back in and train 24 hours later, that didn't mean to say that all tissues had repaired. And so when they went in then to an intense bout of exercise again, they may well be overloading a system to the point where they haven't put back what is lost. They haven't allowed for appropriate recovery. And I suppose understanding the code means that we are becoming somewhat more mature and somewhat more respectful and knowledgeable in terms of what the various connective tissues need in terms of healing and the time for repair. And that's why it shouldn't be a surprise why so many people end up with tendinopathies, why people end up with what we refer to as, overtraining syndromes or staleness, because this really is very, very new science. It's cutting edge science. And so the code is so important.
We've got quite a few good questions. Sorry, guys. We've got some questions on topic to what you've just been talking about. Shall I ask them and then one of you can
go?
So we have from Facebook.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. How fast the tissue gets adaptations? Which exercise or with exercise or manual therapy? How fast are these tissue adaptations? I guess they mean, but there's a stream of other questions around similar questions.
But can I address, you want me to address that?
I just thought I'd name it.
Okay. All right.
Shall I read the three main questions and then we can get back to them and put them in context of the whole thing? So Debbie's asked on Facebook, we've got loads of people there too. Is it this adaptation of these tissues that makes it hard to find the cause of disrupted movement in our clients? So that's question number 2. And Alyssa has kindly asked, in architecture, the space is just as important as the structure itself. Can someone talk about the space or the fluid within the structure? Jean-Claude Gumberto calls it the vacuole. Is it the structure that adapts or the space fluid that adapts?
Wow, what a set of questions. Wilbour, you say what you were going to say, and then I want to say something that ties that all together.
Well, yeah, so what I was going to say, to add to what John was, what eloquently puts together about the SAD principle, is also, when we talk about functional, a lot of people, like functional nowadays is like the new, I want to drink milk, milk is good for you. When we look about functional, or we look about exercise, we have to think of a concept that we call transferability. How effective is the activity you're doing going to be transferable to what you really want to do, if you want to train for something? In terms of just general health, what I suggest to people is that you just move. This is what we're meant to do. That's why we have joints. You just have to move. There's no specific things that you need. You just need to do movement. If you like to climb trees, if you like to swim in water, if you want to walk, if you want to hike, if you want to ski, you just have to keep moving and reduce your tendency to be static, because staticness is what creates a lot of issues for us. So that's just something I wanted to add, and the concept of transferability. And this is something that we will address in the Vancouver conference, because it's a little bit extensive when we talk about how, especially with specific types of training for people who are involved in certain sports, running or swimming or whatever. How does that exercise fit the demands for that sport to allow the adaptation to take place? And it's a beautiful question that was asked in terms about how long does adaptation take place? Well, adaptation starts immediately. The amount of adaptation to be effective in certain types of activity, I think, based on some research and based on experiential evidence, we're looking at somewhere anywhere between 8 to 12 weeks for connective tissue, for fascia, to really get an efficient effect in its adaptation. And I don't know if John wants to comment on that in terms of the science out there, but that's usually about the time we're looking at. And that adaptation will continue to start seeing an effect in that time, but it will take months and months to get to where you really feel good within yourself.
Yeah, the half-life of fascia is different to muscle fibers. Muscle fibers really have, I think part of the key to that is blood supply, and blood supply to muscle fibers is far greater, and therefore it makes absolute sense that the muscle fiber will, in fact, I may be wrong about this. You were talking about adaptations over a 12-week period. I think I may be wrong, as I say. The question may have been related to, if I go to do a workout today, should I do a similar workout tomorrow, or do I have to allow 24 hours or 72 hours or whatever it might be? And of course, it's a little bit in a conversation like this, how long is a piece of string? Because it really depends on the intensity and the type of activities that you were involved in. But suffice for me just to say in this conversation that that connective tissues, depending on their density, their thickness and density, recover at slightly different rates. And some of that, of course, is related to fluid flow. However, I would like to make sure that people understand, this is another concept that people really struggle with. There is no fluid that is, swishing around in the body other than in the urinary system. You can sometimes, when you have food in the stomach and we have various acids and enzymes acting on that, we've swallowed saliva, you can sometimes hear that if you move, but you do not have free fluids in the human body. It's all bound water. And so that in itself actually is probably a difficult conversation, because we would need to take people through a sequence of presentations in order for them to truly understand. I suppose the best way of saying it is that you take a piece of steak, and I mean fresh steak, and put it through a mincer, and you will not see water escaping anywhere. So, maybe Joanne wants to expand on that, but just bear in mind that there is no free fluid in the body. It's all bound.
I think what I was going to say, actually, I can tie in quite well with that, because I think one of the things we get very caught up on, and we can't help it, we've been brought up for hundreds of years of inherited anatomy based on those parts, those muscles, the fluids, the connective tissue, as if they are separate. And when you start studying biotensegrity, we start off going, oh my God, it's all connected. And we know it's connective tissue. And this shocks me every year, John, in Dundee, when we do the biotensegrity based soft fix. I must emphasize soft fix dissection. I've done a lot of, as you all have, of formaldehyde dissection, where there appears to be layers, there appears to be strata, like there are in most cadaveric dissections. But in fresh frozen or in the soft fix, what we see are not only the muscles and the tendons, but we see these very fine, almost diaphanous membranes everywhere that are also completely connected, but connected to each other. So the whole piece is one huge bio-organic origami folding and self-assembled architecture. And that self-assembled architecture is a volume. It's not a line wrapped up the front, down the back, up the sides, and in spirals. It's nothing like that. It is a continuous continuity. And those spaces are organized. Somebody asked about those spaces. They're virtual spaces. They're not real spaces. If you cut the body anyway, you might expect from a drawing of the arm and the biceps that we could go in dissection and just snip at the origin and the insertion and lift that muscle out and lay it on the table. And nothing could be further from the truth, because there is nowhere that so-called muscle is not connected to its neighbors. It's like expecting to cut an orange in half and find one segment just dangling on its own in the middle and you just pull it out. You can't. You have to take the whole thing, and you have to gently slide or open one membrane off another. And those segments in that piece of fruit are all completely connected everywhere, to the center, to the skin, and to each other. And that's what happens in the body. But one of the things I just want to kind of sideline to for a minute, and I won't hijack the conversation, but we talk about specific adaptations to impose demands, but there are also specific adaptations to expose demands. And this is kind of looking at the whole thing round the other way in a mirror. You have an intention to move or to eat or to animate. And that internal network and that internal architecture is also dealing with the subtle animations of the living anima animus, the being inside it. So homeostasis isn't just about doing the right exercises at the right time. It also, the whole thing pervades into another word I want to offer you, along with adaptation and all the other lovely words for this code, is that we generate this almost reflective ability to work out what's appropriate to us at the time. And we're kind of talking about that, but it's a self-sensing. We are self-assembled. And that comes from the organization of these virtual spaces and this internal structure versus this external structure. But the exposed demand is the intention to move when you are strapped in a car with a seatbelt is an inappropriate motion for those circumstances. And so it becomes quite complicated, but actually it's quite simple in that biotensegrity gives us this sense of force transmission, but it's not just sitting intellectually deciding, well, I'm going to do 500 press-ups this week, therefore my body's going to adapt or not. And we have an argument between two gym instructors as to whether it should be 50 or 25, which is better. The truth is, it's different for everyone and for each one of us at any given time. So this becomes quite an interesting code, because when you start to unravel it, you start to unravel a human logic that becomes available for all different kinds of expressions, because every single one of us is unique. And paradoxically, that's what makes us all the same. Every single one of us is unique. So we have to have this balance, because nature only does balance, and she does it so well, of the exposed coming from within and the imposed coming from without, and finding the balance through the spaces that these forces are transmitted through, and from the elements that transmit them. So it's a wholeness, it's a integration, it's a, help me, say more. Back to you.
It's a continuity.
Continuity.
Yeah.
But it's a continuity of specialization. It's a continuity of differentiation. It's specialization, basically.
Yes.
So what we're talking about is fascia in the context of physical and biological makeup. And so those forces that are acting upon the body are very cell-specific. They're translated and communicated into what is a popular term now, which is mechanotransduction. And again, it's once again trying to understand what mechanotransduction ultimately means, because when a person goes about their human movement in an inappropriate way, then what you can get is you can get condensations of connective tissue, condensation of the fascia. And what that does is it basically acts as a block, or I call it a dampening effect. It acts as a dampening effect in terms of the wave like motion of energy within our connective tissues. And this leads to a disconnect. For instance, for those people who are sitting on a regular basis, this leads to a disconnect from the lower limbs to the upper limbs. I'm constantly trying to teach people that the forces that you use, the forces that you generate and use in your upper limb are in fact generated. I know that's a hypothesis, but in my world, and I would give a rationale for that in a class situation, they are generated in these tree trunks of muscles in our lower limbs. And of course, those forces must make their way through what people now call the core, and then they arrive here. So does a biceps brachii exist? Yes, a biceps brachii exists. If you wish it to, we can cut it out and make it exist. It doesn't exist in terms of the overall contextual aspect or view of the upper limb, but it is a fine tuner. It's a fine tuner of doing whatever you want to call this motion, a flexion and extension. And so it shouldn't be left to perform this action on its own, which unfortunately is what so many people are motivated to want to do. They want to go into a fitness center or a health club or do some other type of training where they disconnect the kinetic chain and they leave the shoulder to hang out on its own. And then they place an imposed demand upon the biceps brachii and associated musculature in order to do what? There may be various different objectives that they're trying to achieve, but ultimately they're trying to make the musculature bigger. They're trying to make the upper limb look like the lower limb. They're trying to create, lower limbs in the upper body. And, the body was never meant to try to achieve that. And that's why we use kinetic chain as our analogy. Sorry, Wilbour, you want to come in?
Yeah, John, again, beautifully said. But before we go on to what I want to talk about is that when we talked about adaptation and connective tissue behavior and muscle behavior to load, one of the things that we know from connective tissue is that within 36 hours of stressing connective tissue, you do have an increase in the sort of response. And that work was done by Magnuson. It's pretty, I think, accurate, and it pretty reflects the whole concept around DOMS, delayed muscle soreness and things like that. It kind of reflects that. So they have done those studies to show that the connective tissue adaptation within that 36 hours. That happens because that's why we know for a fact that if you go and train today and then you go and you train again tomorrow, and you haven't given yourself the time to adapt, you can create what we call overuse. So, and that takes, again, a little bit different explanation. But in terms of what you were talking about there, in terms of people isolating training, which is a big thing that, in terms of what our symposium is going to address, think about this. The body, as it says, is connected through these kinetic chains. But the body is designed such that it creates its own, what I call, internal anchors. The body, still has to obey some basic laws of nature, the basic laws of gravity. And how can a body generate force? How can the laws of gravity, Newton laws, for some basic laws, apply to our system? Gravity still affects us. How does a bird fly? How can the bird generate force to keep it going? So then that's where the tensegral, biotensegrity, biomovement comes into play. So the body has its capacity to set up its own internal anchors. What we do when we sit and do certain exercise, or we try to isolate and do certain exercise, is that we disrupt those internal anchors. So those internal anchors which help to generate that movement or that force is no longer connected. So you have this sort of disbalance which occurs in the system. And that leads to what I call tensegral dysfunction. Correct. So you have a discontinuity, right? And there's something that I call no sit exercise, because basically your anchors are your feet and your hands. Correct. In terms of our movement.
Your feet and your hands ultimately are the only true fulcrums. Are the only true axes in the human body. And any other one should really be seen in terms of, I was saying this at the weekend in Cork, they should really be seen in terms of transitions. In other words, there are certain movements. I said it at the weekend in Cork. I asked the class, when would we do a sit-up? And somebody said, well, when you're getting up out of bed. And I was thinking, well, good luck to you if that's how you get up out of a bed. You would never get up out of your bed like this. Most people would roll over onto their sides, swing their legs off the bed, and would come. You would never go into this type position. And in fact, I would even argue that these traditional sit-ups, which we thought were going to be outlawed, we thought they were going to be a thing of the past. They're not. They're still one of the most popular exercises. I see them as I'm driving in my car coming home in the evening times. I look into different parks we have here in Dublin, and I see people out with their boot camps and their training. And this exercise, if you really want to increase your risk of various types of hernias, go and do sit-ups. It's a great exercise for giving you a hernia, but it really has no relationship with any functional movement. And your lower back or sacrum will be in contact with the floor, and your shoulders at some point, and your feet will be, and these are not natural axes.
Yeah.
Brilliant point you made, Wilbour. Brilliant point.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I just say one thing in that? And that is that I think the other thing is I've seen some questions, people asking us, is strength training good? Is this training good? Blah, blah, blah. One of the interesting things I find as a structural body worker is that when I say to people, what's your movement pattern? What do you do? What's your movement? They always answer in terms of how much running they do, how much swimming they do, what sport they do, or how many classes they go to. And one of the things I think we have to realize is that the fascial matrix and its biotensegral organization of force transmission is 24/7, literally 25 hours a day. It's listening, it's responding, and it's dealing with these emergent properties. And what that means is if you are sitting all day, you are training. And you're training in the sit and slouch gym all day long. And then one day, if enough time has passed, as Wilbour spoke about earlier and John has alluded to, once enough time has passed, you go to get up. And that postural set that you've been training in for all these years in this little drip feed is stuck. Now, the body is infinitely amazing at adapting and readapting. But if I had the power to change one thing in schools with children, it would be how they sit and how they stand from sitting, and where they sit and how much time they're allowed to spend sitting. because we are literally training ourselves to sit and slouch. Now, your beautiful crunch, John, that you're talking about, where we come up and we do it all beautifully and we pretend we've got a peach or an orange under our chin and we just crunch the body. And I know this is one of your baby bears, Wilbour, because you've shown me. And this concentric loading is literally training the anterior abdomen into the sit and slouch pose. Genius. It's genius. I mean, I'm being sarcastic. So go to you.
No. Joanne, it's true. I mean, and the sit-up thing is that the anterior abdominal section or the anterior part of your body is not meant to be overstrong in flexion if we're talking about appropriate posture for maintaining upright movement. We weren't meant to sit. We were meant to be hunters and gatherers and looking up for food and moving and stuff like that. You cannot do that in a flexed position. Then we should be on all fours. Right. I mean, the concept here in terms of looking at tensegrity and looking at the body matrix is very logical when you just look at just normal human movement. If you look at your body, you have a ball and socket joint in only two. You tell me where else there's a ball and socket joint, except maybe for your TMJ, which can be considered. I guess I could talk to Graham Scar about that, but it's in your hip and in your shoulder. That's it. You go find your ball and socket joint somewhere else. And why are those there? Omnidirectional movement, omnidirectional forces, which fits into a whole concept about this idea that there is no linearity to our body movement. We are constantly in this web of tension and compression in a global sense, right? So then we have to start thinking that way. And when we think that way, we will diagnose differently. We will start treating differently. And this is what we're going to be addressing in this symposium. We may be not going to show people any new exercises to do, and say this. No, everybody knows exercises. We want you to understand the concept, because when you understand principle, you get away from the cookie cutter concept, where everything fits this and everything fits. You have to understand principle. You can then take this principle and apply it to anything, any structure.
We're not so interested in what people think. We're interested in how people think.
Yeah,
and it's how they approach the body. I think one of the difficulties that we have to overcome is the fact that first of all, we have to talk about the codes specific to members of the general public, to the people who are within our communities. But then everybody loves sport. I mean, we just had Ireland versus Scotland in rugby at the weekend. Everybody loves sport. But you look at the rugby match and the players come away from those matches broken. You can't say in that regard that sport is healthy and specific to that. And they have to train in very specific ways. The problem I think we have is that people then try to emulate and try to copy those training techniques for members of the general public to try to give them something that's a health-related benefit. And you're not going to get health-related benefits from training in that regard. You need to understand that if you're going to be involved in competitive sport, you're going to train at those high-level intensities, something has to give. You're not going to get away without kind of walking that tightrope between health and injury. And we need to be able to differentiate between those populations, the sport-specific, hence why we talked about specificity and adaptations, because there are individuals who are going to come in and say, I want to be able to hit a golf ball 370 yards. Well, that's one heck of a skill, and therefore you're going to have to train specifically to be able to do it. The problem with that, of course, is there's also going to be the repetitive nature. And, I work and have worked over the years with golfers, and, whether it's Tiger Woods or whether it's any of the other, big names in the golfing world, Graham McDowell from Ireland or any of the others, they all have issues that they have to stay on top of. None of them get away without having repetitive strain injuries. That's just the nature of what they do.
And the other side of what you're talking about, of course, John, that's the side that I tend to embody more than what you guys are doing, and I hope, I'm going to have great fun with this in Canada, is that the soft side of our lives, the relaxation side of our lives, doesn't actually have to be the only alternative to your vigorous exercise and your specified elite training is sitting in the sit and slouch gym in an armchair in front of the television. there's a spectrum. And one of the things that I hope our understanding of structure and of biotensegrity principles, as Wilbour put it so brilliantly, is that we understand that this is a spectrum from speed to stillness, or from stillness to speed. And that actually we can sit in extremely powerful ways, as any of you out there that do yoga know. And one of the things about learning to sit really well and learning to be still with ease and grace and presence, and the slower side of things where the whole autonomic nervous system actually gets to be extremely peaceful, is a very powerful counterbalance to these faster, stronger, fitter, correct or incorrect strength training exercises, that actually we can take a step back from that and just say, okay, what's the spectrum in my life? Do I actually give any of my attention to being still and being present? Or am I constantly caught up in that competitive, am I doing as well as I did last week? Am I going as fast as I did last time? Am I going as fast as my colleague? We have to pull back from that. And this thing we keep coming back to, equilibrium, nature, homeostasis, call it what you will, is that we have to give account to, for example, breathing rhythms. I mean, great big huge subject, something I think, John, we're going to, we'll probably explore in Vancouver. I know we're going to look at it in Switzerland when we work with Bill Skoll, and in our webinars and all these things, we're going to look at the breathing rhythm. Because one of the other things that the fascial matrix does, as well as having a physical pattern, John talked about the waves of force transmission. These are basically sound waves. These are rhythmic waves. This is a translatory mechanism of resonance. And how we manage that resonance, you can't just constantly play a guitar or a harp with everything tuned to its highest pitch the whole time until the thing snaps. You have to have variability. So this adaptation has to become a variable adaptation.
Yeah,
that's why I mentioned. Sorry, Will, but that's why I mentioned that it is cell specific. In other words, mechanobiology is about vibrational frequencies, and they are cell specific.
Yeah,
they're translated into communication on a body-wide level. So cells are talking to each other, and the type of forces, tensions and compressions that we subject our body to will ultimately dictate our neurophysiology. It will ultimately dictate our digestion and our metabolism. And again, I just think that we're entering, I think, into a new era now where people are beginning to realize that various cells have different time dependencies, and therefore we need to allow the appropriate time to be able to achieve the benefit from the type of physical activities that we were involved in. And sometimes that requires relaxation and maybe contemplation and looking back and thinking and enjoying the moment, as opposed to this idea that you have to be doing something all the time. Of course, you are doing something all the time. That's the big message to get out there, that even when you think you're not doing something, you very much are doing something. For instance, you're allowing sympathetic tone to lower, which in turn allows for parasympathetic tone to rise, so that you can get on with digesting and repairing and putting back what was lost, so that you can begin to recover. I mean, Wilbour knows very well of the number of athletes who suffer with staleness, who suffer with under-recovery and overtraining.
Yeah.
And that's true of the general public as well. If we think of so many of the autoimmune problems that we see, simply because you can visualize somebody's in tray and their out tray is this level, and they're just, that they can't catch up with themselves. And then when they come home in the evening time, they've got to contend with the kids and maybe making the lunches for school tomorrow. And, I suppose if we did nothing else but encourage people just to take, if you can find half an hour yourself, lie down and just relax for a few minutes. That would be a good starting place. Yeah. Just walk. Go for a little half-hour walk, of course, is the best form of physical activity.
Yeah. Well, how beautifully said, John, because it comes back to the the concept where about recovery and the concept about creating this sort of balance where we have, you know, activity, and then we have balance, then we have sleep. All of these things, sleep and recovery, is just as training. Mm-hmm. Because you cannot exist, one cannot exist without the other, just because of the nature of connective tissue. So rest is as important as training. Mm-hmm. And if you think you're just training and no rest, then you're defeating the purpose, because the tissues have a half-lifetime. They need to recover, to regenerate proteins and all of these different things. So the rest portion, I hope people don't think that we're always thinking about movement. Yes, we're thinking about movement, but you need to rest. You need to chill. Okay? As we say in my culture, slowness, being slow is not a bad thing, right? And sometimes people equate slowness to lateness. So we live in a society where everything is just rush. And I think creating the right balance, creating the right equilibrium along that spectrum that Joanne is talking about, I think is absolutely important to our existence. And, you know, we live in a society, for example, even walking, if you take walking, for example, you know, a lot of people don't know how to walk because we live on a flat land and we go chip, we don't lift our legs, we don't swing our arms. So where the hell do we create the tension and the compression? And I'm so excited about this because we're going to talk about this. You know, people don't know how to walk. So they can't use the extensors, their gluteal muscles. And he says, oh, I didn't know that does that when I walk. Of course, that's what it's responsible for. So all of these things we have to look at when we talk about movement. We have to change the pattern of behavior. Right?
I want to come to that event. What event is that?
Can I come? I want to be. I'm absolutely gutted that I'm not going to get to do your day, Wilbour, and John's day. I'm going to be stuck in a room doing my day, which I'll love.
Well, we'll have an event for ourselves. But you know, it's so exciting. It's exciting to kind of think. When you think about these things, I mean, for me, in practice, teaching techniques are just basic human behavior in terms of patterns of movement. I spend so much more time doing that. It's not about doing massage or soft tissue on people. I want them to change their behavior. They're only with me for half an hour. They're with themselves for 25 hours. Mm-hmm. And our role as practitioners is to teach people, how does my behavior affect my existence, my rest, my chill out time, my activity,
my dancing,
what I eat. You know, my dancing.
Change the code. We need them to change the code. This has become the cry now. Change the code.
Yeah, I mean, your food.
To do one new thing. I mean, I'm seeing some things about continuum movement. There's about 1,000 different yogas for every yoga. There's Pilates, and I get people saying, no, you should be doing this. No, you should be doing that. You should have that therapy or that thing. No, you self-assembled. Let's get the principles right, which is what I think we're doing. Because, I mean, we just all sat there and said, hang on a second, why do we keep going to these conferences where we're sat on our tushes getting aching backs and aching legs
motivation for this,
for the whole day? And so we're doing something that involves addressing directly the kinesthetic logic, the code to this kinesthetic being, and so that it's free to animate in its own way. And I think everything works, as you often say, John. Everything works, and all the different. There's value in everything.
Well, it's what Wilbour said. Get up and move. We're all saying get up and move, and we love movement.
Yeah, like I'm doing right now.
Yeah,
I got to get up and move.
Yeah, I'm going to do this well. Just bear in mind exactly. Just bear in mind that there's movement or lack of movement, which results in specific adaptations. And we have to remember as well that when I use the word hierarchy in the human body, it depends on the conversation. If we're talking about structure, there really isn't a structural hierarchy from the micro to the macro, but there is hierarchy in terms of we do have a respiratory system and we do have a nervous system, etc. And what the body wants to do is the body wants to try to be as economical in terms of its energy expenditure. So basically, if you're sitting in a position for a long period of time, the code that you're using and the code that is being represented internally is computed. Forgive the word computer. We're not a machine, but it's being translated into, this is the position that I want these joints to be held in. And so what the body tries to do is, rather than trying to overload the musculature to hang those joints in that particular position in space, it says, is there another way that we can actually sustain this posture that won't cost us as much energy? And of course, the body says, yes, well, one of the things we could do is thicken the fascia. And by thickening and stiffening those areas, we can hold the posture, but yet we don't have to increase muscle expenditure, the muscle contracture. And so then, if you've got this forward head posture sitting all day, when you go to stand, you still have the forward head posture, because you have coded that into your system. And it makes absolute sense, because the biotensegrity is such a magnificent construct at adapting. So it shouldn't be. And of course, what we need is a little bit of everything. And no harm in watching a little bit of TV. There's some great Netflix stuff out there, and Sky, whatever. There's lots of lovely, but just as Wilbour just did there, I mean, stand up and give yourself an opportunity to move, and you shouldn't be. We're now sitting on average for 12 hours a day, and then we drive home or take the bus home. We're sitting, then we get home, and God, I really do understand the pressure that people are on, and how they might just, they'll eat a bit of dinner, but then they want to find some way of being able to relax, of being able to chill out. And so, that packet of hobnobs and a nice comforting cup of tea, and it won't be just one or two hobnobs, it's the packet, you know what I mean? And I really do feel sympathetic for people, because they kind of go, what else am I going to do? I'm looking for some way of, but we need to encourage them to try to find new ways of being able to find enjoyment in movement, because for a lot of people, their experience in school, physical education, wasn't always one that was enjoyable. So that probably has put them off the idea of physical activity. We need to change the code.
Code. Yes, John, and I think there's the evidence in terms of just not moving, what it can do to your tissue. For example, if we take someone and you put a cast on the leg, you have a broken leg, and we want to stabilize it. After 6 weeks, you lose a lot of tissue. So if you think of your sitting, it's like having a cast on your body. You're having a cast around your trunk, around your low back. The intrinsic fascia, myofascial tissues will definitely atrophy with time. It's adaptation. And we may say, oh, well, we only do it for 6 hours, or we only do it for 7 hours. There is another thing about connective tissue. Connective tissue adaptation is additive. We used to say something in our culture. When you make a line in a lake or in the river, then it has no evidence. So we used to say in our language, chapa water have no mark. Means that if I put a needle or a straw into a glass of water and I take it out, after a few minutes, nobody can come and say I put a straw in. Connective tissue is not like this. Connective tissue adapts. If I go like this on my hand, 10,000 times, I'm going to have a bruise. You won't see it on my skin, but John, I can get it on your head. I can go like this. The people who run and their shirt rub on their nipples, all of a sudden, they have this bruise. This is what we call additive adaptation. The tissue is responding to some sort of insult. Sitting, movement, doesn't matter, whatever. It doesn't like not moving, it will decrease in size. This is simple. If we just look at it like this, it will understand why any kind of movement is good.
We used to have it. Do you remember, Wilbour? We used to have it in the runners in the late 70s into the early 80s because of the Nike logo. Do you remember that? There used to be this little Nike logo on the running top.
Yes.
And, people were complaining about this on their left nipple.
Yeah.
They changed it, And the same with the runners, of course. But the runners were designed really for young people to come in and buy them because they were trendy. They weren't really designed for running, and so what you had was you had this big bar at the back of the rotor which was cutting into
the Achilles,
the Achilles or into the calcaneal tendon, so on.
Yes, I mean, so all of these things. I mean, there's something else I say, that your medicine is your food, and food is your medicine. It's the same. Medicine and movement movement and food are your medicine.
Sure, Hippocrates, yeah.
That's basically what it is, because we need, instead of having all these additives and all of these different things, we just need the natural behavior of use our universe, use the resources.
But there's also the fact that we have to learn it again. I mean, we were talking this weekend, John, about correct movement, and people have got some very, very strange ideas about, I mean, we'll go into this when we've got time and we've got the day to spend, but not all movement is good just because you're moving. There's some pretty unintelligent movement sequences.
Well, I agree, Joanne. That's why we have, people doing some, so that's what I'm saying. Like, functional movement is the new, I want to drink milk, You see people doing some stuff and you're wondering, well, you see people on their knees doing sit-ups, crushing a sesamoid bone, really? I mean,
we might go back to Julian in a moment for more questions, but and this might seem a little bit esoteric, but if it contradicts nature, it's wrong. Now we have to be able to put forward a description to people so that they understand what that means, and I'm not going to get to do it this evening in this particular conversation. But if it disagrees with nature, it's wrong. So movement has to reflect, biotensegrity has to reflect nature, and we have to follow the very same laws of the outer cosmos for this inner cosmos. And Wilbour was talking about the fact that, that movement, I'm paraphrasing now, but movement is life. And when we go out into the outer cosmos and we look at those planets that are not moving, now I know water is an absolute and utter essential aspect, but when there's no movement, what you find is that the planets are dead. When there's movement, then the chances are there's going to be some life. So Julian, I love the idea that we're getting people asking questions, because then we're interacting in terms of what's important to them.
Yes, it's fantastic. We've got well over 100 people engaging and giving beautiful feedback on Facebook, which you'll all be able to go and see afterwards in the coming days. And I also wanted, we're reaching nearly an hour, and I wanted to take this opportunity. The few of you have, I mean, I'm happy to run over a little bit, but you've probably all got places to be. But the question,
I got 10 minutes.
Cool. I wanted to also say, people are loving this, and to flag up some of the places where they can get more interaction with you guys and come and meet you, hang out, do courses. And we've got a exciting thing to share tonight. And Andreas just give us a nice fancy URL, which is easier to remember, for an online course on fascia integrity that John and Joanne are going to be running on eHealth, which is very exciting. So we do have also a list of questions. So for those of you that have just got an hour, do you want to speak? I'm going to post the link to this new course that John and Joanne are going to be doing with us on eHealth. So I'll post that now. From
my perspective, the best thing for me to say, because I'm useless at social media, I really am, but if people are interested, just come to my Facebook page, because I have different events coming up, I think 3 times in Italy this year. Myself and Joanne will be in Switzerland. I've a Feldenkrais Summit.
And we're all going to be in Canada together.
We'll be in Canada coming up. So really what I tend to do is I'll tend to put up notifications of these things several weeks in advance, so that people hopefully will have plenty of time. And of course you can't get to everything. I mean, people can't afford to be going to all of these things unless they're Graham Scar, because he's retired. He could just go everywhere. He lives the life. I mean, Graham flies to Paris to go to Cork.
Oh, stop it, John.
John,
he had to go by Paris. He was so dedicated to working with you, John Sharkey, that he went by Paris to get there. Bless him.
John, let me say this, is that if people want to come in and hang out with us, I think a very good opportunity is to come to beautiful Vancouver.
Absolutely.
And we will host you in Vancouver, and you get an opportunity to hang out at the practical symposium on biotensegrity. So, but
you also get Robert Schleip, you also get Dr. Stephen Levin. you know, so it's not just the three of us, but
yeah, and we're not all snooty, you know, that we disappear. We're all going to be hanging around with you guys, so we'll be, you know, it's cool.
And we want Graham to come to Vancouver. So John, don't give him a hard time, okay? I would love Graham to be here with us.
So
get on the phone to him, Wilbour. He doesn't do Facebook.
Who, Graham?
Yeah,
Oh,
he'd love you to have him.
I'm not very big on social media myself. You know, I'm a novice to social media, but I love talking to people.
Too much stillness and sitting on social media, unless you do star jumps while.
Yeah, it's exactly like Biotensegrity. You've got to be communicating. You got to get out there.
But can we take a question?
My gosh, there's loads. So
pick one, Julian. We can't see the questions, by the way, everybody. We're just being fed them.
Yeah.
I pick one that's shorter and that I really like from Bill Scholl. The concept of self-sensing makes perfect sense. Well, how could it be? Becomes the question that we as touch and movement therapists can ask. Okay, that's very philosophical. I'll pick another one. I will say something about that.
Okay. What you don't do is you don't force your agenda on the body. You have to develop the skills and knowledge to be able to have an intelligent conversation with the trillions of cells that are you. That's what I would say in that regard.
Great. Fabia asks, we change the collagen with manual therapy or just ECM?
I think you're going to have a real tricky time separating collagen from the extracellular matrix. And I do think that question it's a brilliant question in many ways, and it's outside the scope of this webinar for the simple reason that everything changes everything. And the change of everything changes everything else. So you can't change a muscle without affecting the whole body. You can't sneeze without changing your eyelashes. You can't do anything without affecting everything. And what we start to understand is that the neuromuscular interface and the fascia has to be part of the self-sensing neural network, to simplify it horribly, but it's for a language of convenience for a short time, is that we are as actively managing what we don't move as we are what we do move. And that's one of the things I'm going to be exploring in Canada particularly, is our ability to not ignore what's not moving, but to actively choose not movement and actively choose movement. And those are two very powerful parts of the variability story that we will go into in more detail.
And in terms of the eHealth program, by the way, sorry, Will, but just in terms of the eHealth program, one of the terms and words that I want to try to, both myself and Joanne, will try to focus on is this idea of release. We get it everywhere we go in the world. Can you release, tissue? People ask about myofascial release. And I think people tend to twist that whole conversation in order to make themselves sound a little bit more cleverer than they really are. So I love the word release, but it needs to be put into a context, because I think people unfairly run away and say things like, you can't release meat, or whatever. But I think it needs to be put into a context, and hopefully we'll help people to build a vocabulary in order to be able to better explain what that means.
Because you can't change the code unless you have a new language, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The thing is that we have to think about that question about the extracellular matrix, is that everything is connected, because we talk about waves, we talk about energy. The body is an electrostatic, system. It's a complex system with energy and with electrical,
emotional, cortical, endocrinal,
all of this stuff. So everything is connected. You can't say that, well, I'm changing. If you can't separate matrix from fascia and cellular matrix and the cytoplasm from. No, it's one thing. Everything changes. Everything affects something else. And we have these electrical impulses going through the body. I mean,
well, but
you have to stop thinking that way.
You've got a #1 hit there.
You've got to put music to that. There's no question.
That was excellent. You told me. Excellent.
I got the sound. We'll play a song in this
I hope you've got serious sound.
And I'm hoping that this is resonating with the people who are listening to us, because that is such an important word in biotensegrity, that it is resonating, that people are listening to what you're saying that makes sense. And what you said earlier as well, Wilbour, is that we're not necessarily going to come along and show you a movement that you've never seen before or an exercise that you've never seen before. However, the sequence of it, and there will be movements that we will be saying to you that you're better off avoiding unless it's for training for transition, but not to be repeated and repeated and repeated. It makes no sense to do that. But I think it's going to provide you with the opportunity to have a vocabulary for explaining and giving a rationale as to why you do what you do.
I'd like to say a few words, John, about this course. Joanne mentioned the word embodiment, and you said we need to, John, you said we need to come into a dialogue with the trillions of cells that make up you. And I think this is really beautiful. And moving into this new year, we're in February, eHealth has realized that we can make our E stand for embodiment. So
wow.
What's exciting to me about your course, Fasciategrity, this 3-module course that we'll be sharing and you'll be sharing with us, is this aspect of embodying the right questions, asking the right questions, which I think you also said. We want to help people to shape how they think, not get a load more techniques, but why are we using the ones that we're using now, and being honest about how can we embody the knowledge of biotensegrity into our movement and bodywork practices and share that with curiosity and in a really healthy way. Enthusiasm with our clients, so we can bring biotensegrity into our practice. So this is why we're sharing that course. And if you follow the link to ehealthlearning.tv/fasciategrity-course, you can see that there's going to be 3 modules there. And we've got an early bird price at the moment with £30 off of £220 for all 3 modules. You can also find the details of the individual modules if you wanted to do that. And eHealth Learning members get 20% a discount off the course in total. So just to give a little bit more information there, if you're watching this recording, that the link will be in the details below. And I wondered if, Joanne, you wanted to mention anything else about that?
I'm just so excited that we're going to Canada, because one of the things that happens in Canada is we actually get to do it. And of course, you're in a completely different domain then, Julian, because we are in real time.
Yeah.
And I love webinars, don't get me wrong. And I'm so thrilled that we're going to be doing this one through eHealth Learning. And we're really grateful to you tonight for putting all of this on Facebook with us, because, you know, we've worked together for years, and I know we all embody the same passion for these principles. You know, we've all got kids. We all want to see our children grow up strong and healthy. And if we've just got that fundamental, simple logic, and actually it's simple. I know there's very complicated extrapolations of it, but it's actually simple. And it's what's so exciting in Canada, and it's going to be a bit of a first doing a symposium in real time, is that it's in real time, that we'll be moving. I mean, there will be lectures from Robert Schleip and Steve Levin, but the essence of it is in motion, as is the one we're doing in Switzerland, and I think some of the stuff you're doing, John, all over the world. I mean, this basically is, we just have to be careful, because biotensegrity is as misunderstood as it is understood. Mm-hmm. And Steve Levin's word were, I can count on one hand the number of people in the world that actually understand biotensegrity, and most of us are here. And so that's not quite true. I think it's slightly more than 5, but not much more. And so there's an awful lot of stuff talked about, you know, the wooden struts are the bones and the elastics are the wires. And in yoga, there's a lot of people who've gone from a compression model to a tensile model. And that's not accurate either. That's like what John said earlier about the fact that on the one hand, we've lived with muscles and bones as if we are only a musculoskeletal system. And now we're looking at the fascia plastination project where we're looking at just the fascia, and they are equally incomplete pictures. Yeah, not distorted. They give us a distortion. What we're trying to do is explain wholeness. And the truth is, air to a bird, water to a fish, being to a human are impossible to see. It's like looking at our own eyeballs. We self-assembled in dimensions that cannot see themselves. So we're actually doing even more than giving a new language. We're creating, facilitating a new way of seeing.
Yes.
And that gives rise to a new way of being, because it is so powerful to be at one with one's self, being at one with other selves. And I know that sounds very philosophical and esoteric, but actually it just means getting on with people and letting things be the way they are and being present to them. And you know, I am so excited to work with you guys, because I know we all sing off the same hymn sheet, all of us.
Yeah. Yes. So in reference to the Vancouver program, we are almost full. So if you guys want to attend, please go on and register, because we can only take a certain amount of people, and because of the practical nature of it, we don't want to have too much of a big crowd and we can't interact. So please go ahead and register if you'd like to attend. We'd love to have you. We're going to make this just about you, as it is going to be about us learning. We want to learn from you. We want to get your input. This is not going to be just us saying things. We want to get your input, your side of things. How do you see? We want us to, this is a learning and creative medium for exploring and going into a new field of some of the unknowns. And I think it's going to be a beautiful event with a lot of positive energy. And we want you to come out vibrant. We want you to come and dance with us. Dance with our ideas and your ideas. Let's create some harmony.
You better have some music there, Dr. Kelsick.
There will be music. You know, there will be music. So
lovely.
Am I right in thinking we're going to have a movie there too? We've got Bruce.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. Bruce is doing Secret of Life, and he's showing it twice.
Fascia, the Secret Life of Fascia.
Yeah, Life Secret of. Yes, he's showing it twice. Yeah. Secret Life of Fascia.
Brilliant.
It's going to be on Friday night for the participants, and on Saturday night he's going to open it up to the public. So for a fee. On Friday night, it's by donation for the participants, and Saturday night, it's for the general public. So he's going to be there, and it's going to be about an hour, the presentation, and we'll be on hand on Friday to answer the questions and stuff like that. So. Brilliant. So it's going to be a wonderful event to be able to share that with Bruce, and he's done so much work. So he's so dedicated, and we could not do this event without supporting him, because this is such a crucial, the educational part, the visual, to share with the world. This is an excellent tool to do that, and I'm very, very, very happy that we were able to include him in this showing.
Wonderful.
So we can do another question, or because I have, how many minutes? I got a few minutes, they say. So it's up to you and John. It's up to John and Joanne.
Oh, I know. If Julian thinks that people are still interested in listening to us and hearing us,
yeah,
I'm quite happy. I just don't.
Another question, Julian.
I don't want to hats off people.
Okay, I've got to scroll back to where they all were. So many messages of thanks. Did you reply, Joanne, to the movement teacher that said, what about combining movement and sound? I said Joanne does that in her work, I believe, and sound has a whole other dimension. Movement and sound is good.
Sort of, yeah, but it depends what sound system Wilbour's got. We can listen, we're going to dance. And hi to Carol. Professor Carol Davis is out there somewhere waving to us, I hope.
Getting her teeth done,
I just wish you
Carol, hello.
And Anna, hi Anna from Brazil. Where are you?
Brazil,
I saw you at the beginning, and lovely to talk to you when we did.
So there's one from Heather. Being a devil's advocate here, if people have muscles that are not firing and have become facilitated, can organizing movement around a myofascial meridian resolve this sensory motor amnesia? And if so, how?
Now you have to come to one of the webinars for that, or be in Canada. That's a huge question.
It was a huge question, because it went into meridians and it was into,
Okay, so about this one. What about our lymphatic drainage system and various fluids, i.e. pleural, CSF, and myocardial, which can be extracted? Are these, John, bound?
Yes.
Yes, all even blood, for instance. Blood is of course a fluid, a liquid, but it's an emulsion. It's a colloid. So again, it cannot be seen in the same context of water. So there's a thixotrophic.
It's not like that.
Exactly. And of course it's only liquid while it's moving, and if it stops moving,
or it's exposed to air,
or if it's exposed to air, then it changes. You get emergent properties, so it becomes quite sticky and changes and then dehydrates and so on.
There's another question related to this, which should probably be quick. The researchers believe our body contains a certain type of fluid named EZ liquid, which has an O3 negative charge, which is essential for electromagnetic charging. Does this have an effect on our fascia as well?
Absolutely has an effect on the fascia. And this is where you're now taking it down into the electromagnetic sphere. And this is why I mentioned earlier about the idea of hierarchy. Although I did mention that depending on the conversation that we're having from a structural viewpoint, we might say there's no hierarchy. But in terms of electromagnetic activity or respiratory function, the facts of the matter are that there is hierarchy. As I've often said, if we suddenly heard a gun going off behind us or an explosion, we would do this. And that's the type of hierarchy that I'm showing, that I'm speaking about. So from a neural viewpoint, you would see that there are certain neuromuscular relationships that occur, and other neuromuscular relationships are different. So for instance, in this particular example that I'm giving you, you could change the language, but it might be more postural fibers, type 1 fibers, that would go into contraction, and therefore there are other types of muscle fibers. There's a whole range of different muscle fiber types that would not necessarily tend to contract. That's the type of hierarchy that I was talking about.
And Christy has asked about the Dundee dissections. Can they find them on the NTC website?
Yes, go to ntc.ie, and then you will see that there is dissection drop-down menu, and you'll be able to join. Oh my
Is
goodness,
there any place left?
What a team! There may be a few. I haven't actually just checked in the last short while, but there may be a few places remaining. I know that there are people who have been emailing saying to me, John, we're coming, we're going to be there. So whether they've been in touch since or not, but who have we got? We have Dr. Neil Thies, we have Jean-Claude Gumberto, we have Jaap van de Waal, we have Dr. Gil Mendes, we have, it's just such a vast team of...
And you'll be there, won't you, Wilbour? And
yes.
And Chris,
Joanne, myself.
Yeah.
And they're teal dissections, aren't they? Somebody asked, are they fresh tissue dissections? They're
no,
teal.
but it's very, very similar. It's really with the type of technique that's used to fix the cadavers, the skin color changes somewhat, but other than that, all the other colors of the tissues remain very real. Not that I do this, but if I wanted to, although I do intubate the lungs, but if we wanted to keep fluids moving through the arterial and venal system, we could do that. We don't do it for this particular course. For surgeons or others in their training, we might do that. All of the limbs move as you would kind of expect them to, a little bit more like an anesthetized patient, going in for operation. So it's a very real experience. And this year, myself and Dr. Vladimir Chermensky, who is the head anatomist for the Von Hagen's Plastinarium in Guben, Dr. Vladimir will come with me to Dundee in advance, and we will do some dissections in advance of participants arriving, just so that we can manage our time better, because I think a really important part of Dundee this year will be the forum, the discussions that we're going to have in terms of a discussion of the connective tissues in the human body and describing them in a new way. So I think that's going to be really really hugely exciting.
And also, John, just to reiterate where you say Neil Teese, I don't know if everybody realizes, but somebody asked about the internal body and the inside of us. And Professor Teese, I don't know what his nomenclature is, what his name is, but he is of the interstitium fame of the internal body, and he's in pathology side. So he's more the microcosm, where we're looking at the body as the macrocosm, and John is referring to the cosmos, but we're looking at the patterns in biotensegrity oriented focus, that we're looking at these patterns of nature in the matter of living form, in all matter. And that's the base principle logic of embodiment at this scale, that what we're doing. So Neil Teese and of course Jean-Claude Gamberteau will be there with his endoscopic camera. And because of course in his own work, he is only able to go to the areas under the skin that are related to the operations he's performing in the living tissues. And because these are like living tissues, he's able to go everywhere, and we can do some absolutely beautiful work. We have means to measure in totally different ways. So I'm so excited.
Yeah, so I can just mention quickly that in terms of dissection, the teal dissection concept or protocol is as close as anybody's going to get to life. I've been in several surgeries. I've done dissection on fresh cadavers. This is the closest that you're going to get to fresh cadaver or surgery. And it's really something for people to really consider in terms of, if you really want to. You cannot understand really, for me, the true concepts around the body matrix or continuity if you do not go to the lab. I have a saying, you got to feel it. You got to feel it. It's like a dancer doing a movement. They're not looking at some structure on the wall. They have to feel their body in the spatial environment. They have to feel it's a connection. Well, it's the same about learning about fascia. You got to be there. You got to feel it. You got to touch it. You got to develop that connection. And to me, I've done formaldehyde, embalmed bodies and stuff. It's not the same. It's just not the same. And if you don't want to come to do the teal dissection, you have an opportunity, if the course is full, I want you to go to a butcher shop. And then the next year, you're going to be in Dundee.
And is there a URL, Wilbour, for the Vancouver conference?
Yeah.
Biotensegrity Canada.com.
Biotensegrity.canada.com. Awesome.
Yes. Biotensegrity.canada.com.
There are some other longer questions which I urge people to take to Vancouver or to the online course with John and Joanne later this year.
Yes.
Tonight has been amazing. I'm sure we've gone over by 20 minutes, which I think is quite good. We could have easily gone on 2 hours like we did last time, or longer, with Wilbur's sunrise on the beach.
That was
magical. Yeah, where's your sunrise, man?
Well, you know what? We have a snowstorm today. We have a snowstorm. Yesterday and today, we got like 20 centimeters of snow. So
we want to go outside. Take us outside like last time.
Okay, I'm going to take you outside. You got to see this. You got to see this. I'm going to walk through my office. Wow. I'm going to take you outside. You got to see the snow. You got to see.
It better be gone by the time we get there. I don't want to be that cold.
No. Well, I'm going to take you to the mountain, Joe.
I knew you would.
So, you got to see take you outside. And here it is. Look at the mountains.
Way.
Wow.
Beautiful.
See that? Look at the offshore mountains.
Wow, that's beautiful.
They're covered with clouds now, but the clouds are going to leave soon.
I can breathe that in. I can almost breathe it in.
Can't you just touch
this is it? Right? And we're going to be down here. Okay? So that's it.
Yay, movement in our webinar.
Is that the office I've been to, Wilbour, or is this a new one?
No, this is the same office. This is the new Maxfit we have here. This is the new Maxfit with our working functional area. We have our aquasizer. We got all these wonderful things here. So this is the new Maxfit.
Wow.
Excellent.
Okay. Julian, thank you so much.
Thank you all. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Brilliant. And thanks to eHealth and to everybody who
Andrea and John Wilkes, wherever you are, we love you.
Yes. So
fabulous.
All right. So John and Joanne, you guys stay on, or we connected later?
I'll give you a call back.
Please. Yeah, please.
Great. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank
and
you.
Have a wonderful time in Vancouver.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you, Julian. Bye.